Okay, good afternoon, perhaps good morning, or even good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to this edition of PON Live. Today, the program on negotiation is delighted to present this event with one of our esteemed faculty members, Alain Lempereur, in celebration of his latest work, Mediation, Negotiation by Other Moves. My name is Nicole Bryant, and I'm the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. The Program on Negotiation is a consortium between Harvard University, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Tufts University. And at PON, we work to help people solve problems, build successful relationships, and deal productively with conflict. And to that end, we're delighted to bring to our global community of scholars and friends a series of virtual events such as this one. And I know that many of the folks who are on this webinar today have actually participated in multiple events. Thank you to all of our participants today. We love seeing where you're coming in from in the chat. Keep that up, please, and make sure to select panelists and attendees so your fellow attendees know where you're coming in from. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We are going to have an event that will last about an hour. Alain will be speaking for about 40 minutes, and at the end of that time, there will be a period, of course, for discussion and questions and answers. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That allows all of participants to see the questions and to upvote the ones that they think are the most relevant. Of course, if you have a comment at any time, you may put it in the chat. Supporting our event today are the PON staff members. I'd especially like to thank Diane Long and Anna Chang for all of their hard work in making this happen. And the program will be recorded today, and it will be placed on the PON website in about a week once we've had time to caption it. So if you do have to duck out early or you want to share it with a friend, you can of course do that. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Alain Lempereur. Alain is a member of the PON Executive Committee, and we actually had our spring Executive Committee meeting yesterday, so I have been getting to see a lot of him and delighted to do so. In addition, he is a professor at Brandeis University and the director of the Conflict Resolution and Coexistence Program at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management. And finally, he is a visiting professor at my own alma mater, Sciences Po in Paris, France. Alain, I'm delighted to have you here today, and now the floor is yours.
Nico, thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome to all of you around the world. And big hello also to my students, former students, current students, also to my colleagues and many negotiators and many mediators. Before I start my presentation, I would like to share with you a very short video, 15 seconds. And you will have to be very attentive because there is one key aspect that hopefully you will grasp from these 15 seconds. So let me share this video. So my friends, I'm sure you grasped the joy. And you probably, if you are from Burundi, you may have recognized former presidents of Burundi on this video. Some of them having done coups against the other people who were in the room. And, you know, it took a long time to get to that point when suddenly they showed such a sense of composing with each other. It's really the negotiation and mediation is really this capacity to share that joy. And I hope that's what we will be doing together in the next hour. So let me share with you the presentation that I hope we will be able to, I'll put it in, present to you. There we are. So I start immediately with this palabre tree. And I don't know if you are familiar with the palabre tree, but it's a tree around which, as you see, people sit. And it's an African tradition, because around this tree, this ancestral tree, for centuries, people have gathered, they have negotiated, they have mediated. And today, in some ways, we are gathered in around the tree of Zoom, right? A Zoom tree. but it's the tree, the palabre tree of PON. So it's a real pleasure for me to be around these palabre tree where we could discuss, where we could share things together. What do I hope to do today? What is the plan? I have 4 parts, and I'll try to be attentive to timing. Tell you that at PON, negotiation and mediation intersect, have always been intersecting for the last nearly 40 years. I'll also tell you more about our experience to empower negotiators through mediation in Burundi and the DR Congo, and of course, making the link afterwards to how mediation is negotiation by other moves, and finally conclude with explaining how negotiators can learn from mediators and mediators learn from negotiators. Negotiation and mediation intersect at PON and have always intersected. Here is what Bill Urey, that all of you know, one of PON founders, co-author of Getting to Yes, author of Getting Past No and the Third Side. With rising conflict in today's world, mediation is needed more than ever. And that explains in many ways the scope of PON. What we do, whether it's about negotiation or mediation, is always empower our participants through 2 forms of composition. Dialogue, 2 people, A and B, are negotiating together. Or trilogue or trialogue, when A and B have a hard time negotiating together, M, the third party, will facilitate the negotiation through mediation between the parties. So PON community, if we think about this, is really a community of negotiators and mediators, and many of us are in the intersection. So let me just do a poll with you, the first poll, and ask you, where do you stand? Do you feel rather as a negotiator, or do you feel rather as a mediator, or maybe you feel that you are both, right? Where do you position yourself? Because I think it will be also interesting to get a better sense of who are these wonderful participants in this talk. Okay, so we have about nearly 2/3 of our participants who have already expressed themselves. So maybe let's end here, and if we share the results, it's so powerful, isn't it? To see that PON is a community. Of course, it's a community where some of us would define ourselves as negotiators only, others as mediators only. But many of us feel that, in fact, we do both. And maybe some of us, we teach negotiation, but we are practitioners in the mediation field. Or maybe we even teach both fields, right? Or we do research in one and compose in the other one. So I think that's really what PON is. And whether you are negotiators or mediators or both, we could say that there is the same philosophy that is in us, right? And it's the same philosophy that will percolate our research or pedagogy and what we do. What are we trying to do very often? We're trying to, as at PON, right? We're trying to help and support our participants so that they can distinguish 2 sorts of negotiation or mediation moves. And you will see this concept of moves will be central to the presentation. And it's really aligned also with what Fersky and Kahneman have distinguished. We could say that somehow they are the system 1 moves. What we do that is fast, automatic, frequent, driven by emotions, sometimes stereotypes, and subconscious. We do it without really thinking about this. But a lot of the things we try to incorporate as part of our repertoire to broaden it is to really also add system 2 moves. Sometimes slow, sometimes requiring more efforts, less frequent maybe, and requiring the use of the neocortical part of our brain. the logical part, where we need to be more conscious. And yes, in so many ways, there are instinctive negotiation or mediation moves. I would call them pre-PON moves as a negotiator or a mediator. And maybe if you are in the room, it's because maybe like me, that's how you were moving in as a negotiator or a mediator. But you came to PON and you realized that maybe we could add a set of other moves, more reflective, part of the system too, when I step back, that could be more helpful. So this distinction that First Key and Kahneman have done between system one thinking, which is hardly thinking, and system two is really at the core of what we will be talking about, because we will see that the more we incorporate reflective moves in negotiation, probably more effective it can be. That doesn't mean that there is something wrong about instinctive moves. Sometimes we need to use them and we will use them, but we need to use them at the right time, in the right place, with the right people. So how does that approach probably could be found in the work we have done to empower negotiators in Burundi and the DR Congo? We talk about that in our book, though we talk about other kinds of mediation. But I just want to tell you about the work that is very dear to my heart. And what was our philosophy? And my mentor, Bob Mnookin, from Harvard Law School and also PON, former chair of PON, really capture what the philosophy of mediation is. Mediators facilitate the resolution of conflict by empowering the parties themselves to negotiate more effectively. So what does that mean in terms of possible orientations for mediators? Well, it might mean that what we call the evaluative model might be very different from a more reflective model, which we call facilitative model. And I think that maybe David Hoffman or other colleagues, Mouli Dinar, are maybe part of this conference, and they know that it's not that we don't consider the evaluative model as useful, but our heart, but also our mind is on the facilitative model. There is a continuity between the two models, but what do we see? What we see is that by instinct, we tend to be evaluative, even as a third party. Think about yourself as a parent. If your two kids have a fight, are in conflict, you will tend, as a mediator with capital letters, to tell your parties, the kids in this case, what the solution to their conflict is. That's what we call the evaluative model, instinctive. The facilitative model is quite different. In fact, it is not, the mediator is not at the top. You see, it's more smaller letters. The mediator is really pushing the parties, inviting the parties to find the solution themselves. So in the first model on the left, that is more instinctive, the center of the picture is the mediator. And in the facilitative model, as many of you know, it's the parties that are at the center of the approach. And that's exactly what we have done in our work in Burundi and in the DR Congo. We have done it after the Arusha Agreement of 2002 and the Sun City Agreement of 2003 in Congo. And what have we done exactly? We have built support to the negotiators. We have facilitated their negotiation. We didn't provide the answers, the solutions. We helped them find the solutions. We were like midwives, so to speak, as mediators. So how does that work? Well, we had local NGOs, the Initiative for Cohesive Leadership in the Congo, the Burundi Leadership Training Program in Burundi, and working with Burundian or Congolese stakeholders, whether it was the National Defense Forces in Burundi or the Ministry of Interior or the civil society in Congo, in the North or South Kivu. So these stakeholders, they were the parties and they were the one defining the process. We were there as international facilitators, whether Howard Wolpe for the Woodrow Wilson Center or my colleague and friend of PON, Liz McClintock from CM Partners, or myself and my colleagues from Essekirene. We also had donors to sponsor that kind of a work. And you see, it's because you had this organizational system of composition that everything was going in a good circle. And what was the consequence of that? Well, it was possible to put together leadership workshops that were facilitated in Burundi through the Burundi Leadership Training Program. And as you could see, look at the numbers at the bottom of the slide, right? Over 10,000 participants went through this process. It started with a Ngozi process, but then the participants themselves said, well, you know, what you're doing is helpful with leaders, but you need to do it with the security sector. You need to do it with the armed movement, and you need to do it with the regular army. You need to do it within the ceasefire commission because they don't get along with each other. And the integrated command of the army, doing it with the FDN, that's the National Defense Force of Burundi, many workshops, as you could see, but also the police in Burundi. And as you could see also, we needed training of trainers, of local facilitators. That's how you could multiply the capacity for negotiation, but also mediation. It was also done for the political sector. I shared with you these 4 former presidents who were at this table together in Bujumbura in 2007. But I could also share, I'll show you a picture later on, when you see the president, the elected president of Burundi, sitting with his vice presidents and ministers. What is also important in this project that was very thorough, where there was a capacity to mainstream a mediation approach for negotiators, right? It was this community-based leadership project, a fantastic project because there was a training of trainers where 30 people, the ones here, from these 30 people, 20 ended up working during 2 years in all the villages of 2 provinces of Burundi, Gitega and Ruyigi. And as you see, it's more than 7,000 local leaders who suddenly were introduced and started using some of the methods, and some of the methods you know very well. The same approach was also used in the Congo, and I don't want to go into the details here, except that it's the participants of the first phases, right, of the first 5 workshops that really helped us, saying, well, it's good that you're doing that in the capital of the country, but the real problems are in the eastern provinces, which is still the case, unfortunately, today. And that's why we had a lot of these workshops for leaders in North Kivu or South Kivu. So what was really the framework we used there? And it was a framework for responsible action, and call it responsible negotiation, call it responsible mediation. It was based on the fact that we know that it is not simply an instinctive move of moving from problems to solution that will be helpful here. You really need to question that instinctive move, which is, of course, dictated by emergency. Well, because it's urgent, you need to step back. And you need to start rebuilding a relationship between people. And you really need to work with them so that they start getting these important process methods, communication skills, so that then they will be able to go back to the solution. That's how you build somehow the joy in that system, right? You really need these reflective moves of stepping back, building the foundation of relationship with people, giving them, providing the message so that now they are ready and they feel that urgency to solve their problems. So examples, a few pictures of that work. As you could see, Liliani, one of our facilitators, she was training midwives, women leaders. Another of our facilitators, Tina Obiol, was working with representatives of the security sector. Here on the right, you could see Howard Wolpe, who was the head facilitator here behind that you have seen in the video at the beginning, former special envoy of President Clinton and also of President Obama in the Great Lakes region, my friend Fabian Sengimana, and Ali, the interpreter, and Liz Baklintok. The other pictures here are also showing that you see here you have the vice president of Congo working with his colleagues, and I've changed well, it's 15 years ago. You see the facilitators are behind, they are not central to what's happening. If the negotiation is taking place effectively among the leaders, why would you intervene? And here you see, and people always wear their name tags, as you could see. And here, if you're really familiar with the politics in Burundi, you might recognize that person who is sitting here with the name tag Pierre. Yes, even the president of Burundi was sitting together at this round table and really trying to advance negotiation in this spirit of retreat. So this is really about mediation being used to empower leaders as negotiators. Let me move to the third part, which is how mediation is negotiation by other moves. I love Larry Zuskind's sentence here. If you want to go fast, you need to go slowly, which is really capturing this idea of you need to go slowly with system 2 moves in order to go fast on what you know need to be achieved, sometimes by more instinctive moves. That's exactly what really was the backbone of our negotiation book, the first move, and it's the backbone of mediation, negotiation by other moves. And Jim really captured that very well in his kind endorsement by saying we need to understand the intimate relationships of both, you know, negotiation processes and mediation processes, because sometimes they are treated as separate, and we see how much we understand and we feel that intersection. And that's what you said when most of you said, well, I feel both as a negotiator and a mediator. So what was, for example, the logic of the first mover negotiator's companion? Well, it was very simple, is that to really trying to promote system 2 moves for negotiators. What do we mean by that? Well, that means that we really need to spot the right reflective moves before we resort to instinctive moves. So before we meet, you know what I will say, we need to prepare. We need, of course, to get to business, but we know how important, right, it is to put people first. We know we need to solve the problems, but we need to structure the process. Of course, we want to convince the other side that we have valid points, but as we know, we need to understand the other side. Active listening on the left is really necessary as a communication skill for active speaking on the right. You know, Jim Sebenius and David Lax, the manager as a negotiator, they have taught us that, of course, you need to claim value at the table, but you'd also need to create value. We need to move on problem solving, but Dan Shapiro, with a co-concern, really taught us that we need to acknowledge emotions, acknowledge this co-concern before we move into problem solving. And whenever we want to adjourn the meeting, because we got to yes, because we want to get things done, we really need to incorporate an action plan in our work. So you see, everything that is on the left here are a series of reflective moves, and many of you already are aware of them, are practicing them, but they are really the foundational moves that will run us through what is probably more instinctive on the right. It's exactly the same logic that we are following in mediation negotiation by other moves. Because of course, we also try to promote system 2 moves for mediators this time, but also for negotiators who are reading the book. What are the instinctive moves as a mediator? Well, we need to do it. We need to undertake. It's a good idea to do a mediation. Well, yes, at the same time, we need to weigh the pros and cons of mediation. In many cases, mediation is the right approach, but there might be other approaches. other types of wisdom that can be also available. Sometimes it could be the use of litigation. Right? It's hard, but it might be the best way. We know we need to perform as a mediator. We need to be effective, successful, and still we know that we need to incorporate principles. Many of you know principled negotiation, right? This phrase was coined by Fisher and Urey. Well, principled negotiation also leads to principled mediation, right? That you need to incorporate the mediation principles to be performant as a mediator. We need to engage a session and do it fast, of course, because there is an urgent problem. But you know that is very important also to take care of the pre-mediation stage. How do I prepare myself as a mediator? How do I prepare myself with my co-mediator? How maybe the parties should prepare themselves. So we have an entire chapter on pre-mediation. Too often we say, well, it's only about managing the session. Well, first we need to be ready, the same way we know we need to be ready in negotiation, but it's a different type of preparation. We need to work on the conflict. And still we know as a mediator that we need to care about their introductory session. That's what we have called the portal. I come back to this in a second. We need to open a path for the future. We need to move on, yes, but guess what? First, if we want to go fast to find the solutions for the future, we need to understand the past. We need to turn to the solutions. Yes, as long as we have taken the time to acknowledge and to surface the core motivations. We need to get a commitment from the parties. And still we need to make sure we have generated enough solutions so that we can identify those that are the best ones. Right? And finally, we need to close a session, not until we have structured the deal. So you see what I'm saying is everything that is on the right is pushing us to go fast. Everything that is on the left requires us to step back. And mediators have to slow down. You know, as a mediator, I don't speak at that speed, I promise you, because I need to weigh what I say. I know that each word matters, right? And each step matters. So yes, in mediation, like in negotiation, we need to question our instinct before acting. And we devote an entire chapter to these pitfalls, these instinctive moves. Sometimes these are pitfalls that the mediators create themselves, but sometimes it's the parties. Maybe it's a trap that the mediator is opening to you. Mediation principles. Well, I guess that many of you, because you know mediation, there is nothing you don't know here. You know, I mean, maybe there is one principle more or less than the list of principles you have already learned and you have incorporated in your practice, in your teaching, etc. Though, I would like to do a little poll here, and let me do it here, because I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you, okay, well, yes, we all are familiar with these principles, but now tell me honestly, as you reflect on these principles, is it so easy to apply them in your daily practice? Oh, it's very interesting. And do you see sometimes some tensions between these principles? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You see, my friends, as I start seeing your answers, and some of you may not want to answer because maybe you're not a practicing mediator, but I'm telling you, you will be surprised of what, and you know what, I hope we could keep these numbers because they are so telling. Okay, let me, maybe I'll let you a few more answers. We have about 50% who have answered this, right? First question, as you reflect on mediation principles, how hard is it for you to apply them in your daily practice? And second question, as you experience them, because we are just listing them, are they sometimes in conflict? Let me end the poll and share the results. It's extremely interesting. And I'm not happy about what you're saying because I don't want anything to be difficult for you. But you see, my friends, if you look at the numbers, right? We have 51% of our colleagues here or participants who have said, a huge majority have said it's difficult. Applying the principles is difficult. Even some of them said very difficult. For some of them, it's not easy, not difficult, which is good for them. Only 3 people out of the hundreds who are attending this webinar, only a few, 3 said, oh, very easy for me, piece of cake. And interesting, do these principles sometimes conflict with each other? Yes, very much, 13%. Yes, often, 52% of you realize that, isn't it true? Yes and no. So there's probably a part of no. No, not really. Only 1% of people say, no. Clear principles, easy to apply. I don't see any conflict. Well, my friends, maybe you're very lucky then. Very lucky. Because what is my own sense of what I have experienced in the reality is that as we reflect, right, on the integration of principles, it might be easy to define them, not always, but it might be easy to understand them. But I guess the hard part is to put them in practice, right? And sometimes at some moments in the mediation, they are easy to apply. At other moments, they are hard to apply. And you see in our book, we are looking at these tensions, these conflicts. Because yes, I mean, independence, I love it. I think it's one of the most beautiful principles for mediation. Well, you know what? Give me the money then, so that we could, and maybe I should be rich and I shouldn't depend on anyone when we do our work in Burundi and the Congo. That would be better, isn't it? But that's right, we need to compose with our donors sometimes, right? By the way, participants always ask us, who is paying for this, right? Because they want to make sure we are independent. But the reality of independence versus the theory of independence could be different. Hey, what about neutrality? Oh yes, neutrality. Well, meaning I don't have to have any opinion about the content of the narratives participants share with me. I don't think anyone is right. And whatever solution they propose, I'm neutral. Yes, we are. Except suddenly when the mediation is going in a direction when my sense of fairness, or maybe the sense of fairness, which is more important, one of the parties might be bruised, right? So neutrality in abstract, it's easy, right? But what if you don't like one of the parties? Well, at least I'll show that I'm impartial. Will you? Are you sure? Are you sure your face is not saying something that maybe your voice is not sharing, right? Impartiality, I love this principle, of course, right? We don't want to take side, right? Mediators are neutral and impartial. But the reality, what I see often is that very often I'm more effective when I build more than impartiality, multi-partiality, equal distance, but proximity with the participants. So impartiality is an interesting concept, but we may want to explore it further. Confidentiality. Well, I'm telling you, when one of the participants in a private caucus, right, is a private meeting, is telling you, well, you think it's easy for me to be in this room with someone who committed genocide? Well, and you as a mediator, you are okay with facilitating that kind of a meeting, right? As you know, respect for the law is important, and that could sometimes collide with confidentiality. Respect for the law. Well, of course, we want to respect the law. And that explains, for example, why some parties could not be invited to the process in the Congo, because they were on the list of the International Criminal Court. So we are not authorized to invite them, right? We wouldn't even be funded if we did. But still, we need to be creative, isn't it? And so we wouldn't invite maybe the person who is on the list of the International Criminal Court, but maybe the N-1, right? And sometimes also the spaces of creativity could be at odds with the law. I've worked a lot with humanitarians, and some of the humanitarian principles sometimes that are really at the core of humanitarian law could prevent some level of creativity. Fairness, we already talked about that. Fairness could be in conflict, for example, with neutrality, but also with self-determination. Why? Because parties, you see, it's, as we know, mediation is a voluntary process. Mediators are just there to facilitate the process in the sense that it's the party's decision. Well, but yes, but what if you think that the final agreement is not fair? And I can give you an example later where I had to ponder between, should we look for example, more inclusive deal? Or just be okay that one party is not signing? So, and you see here that self-determination of the parties could also sometimes collide when the evaluation mind of the mediator is wanting to push in a direction rather than another. Okay, just an example to say that, oh yes, these mediation principles, we have heard about them, but they are hard to put in place. And we need to be aware that there are a lot of dilemmas as the one we just illustrated. What is the portal? Well, it's just a way of making sure that for those of you who don't know mediation, you have it right as much as possible. And we have an entire chapter about this. How do you make sure that you introduce yourself and get the parties to introduce themselves, present themselves? Then you clearly identify what the objectives of mediation are, what mediation is, what mediation is not. Then you need to talk about the rules of engagement, the principles, right? Some of these principles we just talked about, but maybe other principles could be no interruption, for example. The capacity, T for time, right? T time, T for time, the capacity for us to, well, it's nearly tea time for me, capacity to structure the mediation moments, right? And the different steps. And when you have done that, when everything is somehow agreed upon, it must be clear. You see, in the introduction, there is an agreement to mediate that is really capturing that the parties agree to proceed with mediation. You see, it's not an agreement stemming from mediation. It's an agreement to try mediation. And then we could launch the mediation on substance. But as you see, we need to go slowly on PORTA so that we could launch, right? I love this quote from The Invisible Man, from Ralph Waldo Ellison: the end is in the beginning. We know that the quality of the end, as you saw in the video at the beginning, will often be determined by the quality of the first introductory session. That's really part of what we learn also over time, that we shouldn't skip that. And then the rest, you know, stage one, understanding the past, because we want to recompose the parts towards the present. What does that mean? A series of moves. That's a distinctive move. Try to identify the sensitive points for the parties that could be negotiated. But that's already a little more reflected, right? We don't simply hear the problem and move to the solution. No, we dig deeper to try to uncover the motivation. And it's where your capacity as mediator to use listening, but active listening, but also effective questioning will be very important. And then before we move to the future and the solutions, it's a time when it is often important to get in the present moment, these mutual understanding or mutual recognition, invite the parties to at least recognize that some of the underlying interests of the other side are valid and worthwhile to consider as we move to the next step. So you see, this first stage of mediation is really recompose the past beyond their different narratives. Stage two, quite obvious, quite well known, generate many solutions, possible solutions before you get to commitment. Invent as many solutions. Not always easy to brainstorm in mediation, but don't forget what you learn in negotiation, all this technology of value creation, as Bob Mnookin called it. And yes, you want to move into the evaluative model of suggesting solutions to be discussed. But then you need to filter, try to get rid of what is beyond the red lines of both sides and maybe start ranking the solution that could be yesable for both. And then as you start deciding, settle the conflict, get a single text, a draft, summarize the commitment, or otherwise thank the parties for having tried to settle the conflict through mediation. So you see, if the first stage of mediation was to somehow decompose the separate narratives to recompose a broader story that we could somehow contemplate, here it is also the idea that positions are separate, positions are, of course, opposed, and suddenly we are able to compose solutions together. Last part of my presentation. You already know everything that I'll be talking about here because it's the consequence, the conclusion of everything we talked about. Yes, negotiators can learn a lot from mediators and mediators can learn a lot from negotiators. Here is what Calypso Nicolaides, former professor at the Kennedy School and professor at Oxford and the European University Institute, is saying. As a negotiator advisor, a negotiation advisor, I have often observed the critical importance of responsible mediation. So we need to learn as a negotiator what mediation stands for. So what can mediators learn from negotiators? What are these negotiation moves sometimes that I feel are too absent in mediation? Oh, yes. You have heard Roger Fisher say that, prepare, prepare, prepare. If you were trained ages ago, you need to evaluate your bat now. You do it in negotiation and mediation too. Acknowledgement of emotions. And yes, this is an important part, right? Seek solutions that are better than the middle ground. Use the techniques of value creation. Negotiation, as well as mediation, is not about compromise. And as you know, it's not about compromise. You know, as a mediator, you could do better than compromising. What can negotiators learn from mediators? Well, they can learn many things from the mediation moves. First, they can learn that when they are stuck as parties, mediators, especially those who have been irrigated by system 2 moves, by reflective moves, they know that these mediators can facilitate their negotiations. They also learn that negotiation, if mediation is about people first, negotiation also is about people first. You see, you have heard in Getting to Yes, for example, that we need to separate the people from the problem. I think we need to go one step further. We need to put people first, and then we are ready for the process. Like in mediation, in negotiation, as we know, we start with the people, we go to process, and then we are ready for problem solving. Another point that is important, empathy. Too often we oppose empathy and assertiveness. No, I develop empathy to understand you, and now it's my time to be assertive. That is not the way it works, actually. No, I develop empathy to understand you, and I accumulate all this empathy, and then it's not as if I was throwing it away. I keep it in myself, not that I'm trying to convince you. In fact, since Aristotle's rhetoric, we know that if you want to be effective in assertiveness, you need to keep the empathy high. And that's what we know also through mutual understanding as a mediator. You will never be wrong to deepen your listening and questioning skills. And yes, if I had to parody Clausewitz, mediation is the pursuit of negotiation by other means. And you understand now why we said mediation is negotiation by other moves. Yes, and you see, here are 3 leaders in different fields. UN Assistant Secretary General, Panos Mountzis. He realizes how key mediation is for prevention and conflict resolution. The former Prime Minister of Italy, Enrico Letta, says, we need it. We are mediators in almost everything we do. It's an essential aspect of leadership and success. And see what Peter Maurer, who is the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, says. We need to prepare the ground as mediators. We need to decide on principles. We need to go through the ups and downs of mediation. We need to prevent these mistakes, these pitfalls, right? These instinctive moves. And we need to get our value systems right, the idea of responsible negotiation or mediation. So my last point will be, I hope as you continue that you will feel the joy of mediation, that you will be capable of making peace, separating warmongers. And you see now today, I found this picture and I bought this drawing where if you recognize that's George Washington actually. And if you need to have really good glasses, is Washington the mediator. This was done during the Civil War, these drawings showing that it's the role of the president to bridge the gap between factions. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alain. What a great discussion. And I certainly enjoyed it. And I see from the chat and the questions that our panelists or our participants did too. So a lot to cover. I'm going to try to get through as many questions as I can. And of course, if you haven't yet asked yours, this is the time to do it. So let's start with just getting to the table. You know, a couple of folks had questions about that. How do we make sure that we can bring parties together either when one feels or when they both feel that they have the upper hand and don't need to come together in a mediation, or when they're so antagonistic that they don't even want to talk?
Yeah, this is a great question, Nicole. And you could imagine, for example, in our work in Burundi and the Congo, it's not simply using these mediation skills, it's bringing the people to the room that is important. And so there was so much work in this pre-mediation stage to bring the people to the table. How did it work? There were a lot of consultations. So, for example, in Burundi, Howard Wolpe met with 60 leaders before we even started these workshops we were talking about. And what was he asking them? Well, he was asking them, who should we bring to the table? What are the problems we should address? What kind of a process do you think we could put in place? So in so many ways, when people, in this case, key leaders in a country are on board and they tell you, I think we need to have these workshops, it's much easier. And then there was a little trick. Sometimes we need tricks, right? I don't know if it's a trick, it's a technique. When participants were invited, right? Before they were invited, when Howard Wolpe was talking to the key leaders, he was asking them to put together lists of potential participants, not simply of their side, but of the other sides, influential people. And so we had all of these lists of participants, and when we were we were comparing this list, that's how we identify these key leaders. And so when these leaders received their invitation letters, what would be their first reflex? Ask the boss. And the boss would say, of course, you could come because I told that you should be invited and there you are. So I think that what is very important in the pre-mediation stage is ownership. We always talk about ownership in the mediation process later on, but I think that there is a lot of work of buy-in before we even get the people in the room.
Great answer, Alain. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Another question that I saw from Lars, a lot of folks, myself included, found in those polls the challenges of applying the principles we all know so well. And the question was, is that because there is an inherent trait around emotional intelligence and and the sense of control about listening to one's own feelings?
What I love so much in one of the last webinars that David Hoffman shared with us, he was talking about these different parts of us. I think this is so much what's happening at that time. In fact, when our inner voice, right, part of us is saying, oh, there's something wrong here. I don't feel that deal. This part is lying. You see, that's what is happening, is that there is a very loud voice. And I think we need to be very attentive to this, In fact, whenever I feel uneasy, right? Whenever I feel there's something wrong, maybe wrong myself about, maybe there's nothing wrong, but you see what is important is to work in teams. That's why I felt that a system where you are not alone, you have a co-mediator and you have an entire team. And if you share your doubts, they will tell you, yeah, I think so. Or no, I think you're overdoing it. You are oversensitive on this issue. Let me give you an example where we felt that we had to make a very tough decision. We are in Goma, in North Kivu, and we have the 6 communities present in this room, a lot of people, nearly 150 people in the room. And there are 6 communities and 5 of them are ready to sign this document. 5 of them are ready to sign the document. And 1 group refuses to sign. It's maybe the first and the second question in a way together, right? And then you need to make a call, but you can't. But I think it's safer to make that call with your team, within your team, to say, is it better to have these agreements signed with 5, or trying to get the 6 on board with the risk of losing the 5 others? Well, I'm telling you here, it's a dilemma, because here you see that the mediator is pushing to go beyond maybe what parties are ready to do. And then through a caucus within the team, we had to discuss, and we decided we need to try. We need to see what's wrong in the text that the group number 6 doesn't want to sign. But then whatever we would change in the text, we had to revalidate with the other 5. So that was not an easy task. But what I'm saying is, if you have major doubts, right, in the application of principles, I think it's harder when you are alone. If you're part of an institution, and that's probably easier. If you have doubts, step back, make a phone call, whatever is necessary. Sometimes it's not possible, but I think that would probably be a safer move.
Great, great, thank you. We have had a number of questions that in one way or another have addressed what happens when it gets acrimonious, you know, and people have gone in with good intentions, and how you reorient to make sure that conversation keeps going.
Yes, it could happen. It could happen, and so that's when suddenly the joy is lost. And I want to go back to joy, because joy is a great thermometer in mediation. When parties start smiling, you know, see how they enter the room, right? In general, they are cold, they hesitate, they are fearless, they are angry. All of these are what my favorite philosopher Spinoza calls les passions tristes, the sad passions. And anger, acrimony, hatred is an example of sad passion. Well, my hope is that you could have seen that earlier. So what I say to my friends and colleagues as mediators, don't let things go too much in a direction. Sometimes you need to have some emotional venting of some kind, right? You don't need to be oversensitive, but you know, there's a moment when it's getting really frustrating for one party, for example. They have not said anything, but they are ready to jump in. I would prefer to have a break. We would prefer to have a break and maybe discuss, right, in private with the famous private meeting, right? I thought it was not easy for you to be there, right? So you see what I'm saying is people talk a lot about active listening, and we need to talk a lot about active looking as a mediator. In fact, is active perceiving we need to be good at. In the room, if we start seeing that we are losing one party, we really need to be to this thing. What's going on here? And that's there's a part of us, part of me as a mediator that is telling me, if I'm attentive to that, I see they are losing attention, they are not there. So so yes, private meetings are probably one of the usual techniques we use, but active listening in the sense of restating what's happening. I don't hesitate to say, well, if I see a party is not happy, I mean, I know it's not easy for some of you to hear what's happening here, but you see, I'm moving my head right and left. I'm not looking at a party and saying, well, it seems to be really hard to hear that. No, I think it's hard to be here, right? You see, one of the most incredible examples I've I've had, right? I shared that with you in the webinar, is when that participant said, do you think it's easy for me to be in that room with genocidaire people, right? Well, you know, this is a big confession. And of course, as a mediator, I'm not there to check, is that true or not? But at least for that person, it's truly hard. And the question is, how do you acknowledge that? You could acknowledge it in private, but then you bring the person back in as if they said nothing. So so it took me a few seconds to think about this. And again, we discussed that in the team, in confidentiality, but within the team. And we said the best again is to acknowledge in the room. That is very courageous for people to be in the room. And there are a lot of things that are said or a lot of things that happen in the past that don't make it easy to be there. So recognizing the anger, if I see it, right, putting a name on it and acknowledging it is already a way of moving beyond it.
That's wonderful. Yes. And so true. We have a question that I think is very timely, which is, you know, we talk about being in the room. What about when the room is Zoom right now?
Oh,
and
yeah.
You know, what are some strategies you can use when we're doing this, but remotely? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, Zoom offers opportunities. I mean, some of us as mediators, we have actually supported organizations to do mediation by Zoom, and the same way you do breakouts on Zoom. Okay, I agree. We're losing part of the, you know, the connection. And for example, I prefer to see our participants than not to see them. So but by Zoom, you could do that. We need to find ways of creating e-proximity. That's why in general, I never connect at the hour. I connect a few minutes before, the same way you would do in a real setting. And there are opportunities with Zoom. For example, last fall, we were able to bring different Palestinian groups from Gaza by Zoom. Well, I've been there, but it is not easy to go there. By Zoom, we could run a series of sessions because it was Zoom. So I think that we need to seize the opportunities of these techniques. But again, I mean, nothing will replace the link. But I think we need to be creative at doing it, right? So using the reaction button, there are plenty of ways of doing it. And by the way, what I do also, it's a little trick, but I have different screens, right? I have my screens with the documents here, but then I bought this big screen so that I can see people as big as they would be in the reality. Because I prefer, you see, I don't want to see you, Nicole, just as a little, you know, small,
thank you.
But no, that's why I stand. I want to see you. I mean, that's why I want to see if you smile or if you're bothered, if you say we need to close because it's 58. You see, I need to feel and sense that. So I would not hesitate to ask people to be creative also in e-proximity.
Right. An e-tree, if you will, to bring everybody back under the pillow. Yeah.
Nicole, when you shared with us that our events by Zoom attract 10 times more people than we could attract at the law school or at Harvard anywhere, well, this is great. I'm so happy that we have an audience all over the world that is attending, and that's because of Zoom. So we can't see. What I hope people will not lose is the opportunities created by Zoom. I look forward getting back in the room, but I also see that there are opportunities when people are at a distance. They are also happy to be, they would love to come to Boston, but most of us cannot be in Boston anyway. So it's good to use Zoom to have these messages.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a wonderful place on which to conclude. So Anna, thank you so much. As ever, it's such a pleasure to be here. with you. And I know that we had a lot of questions. I'm sorry we can't get to everything. I will say, of course, everyone, please go out and grab this wonderful book, Mediation, Negotiation by Other Moves. Congratulations to you, Alain. Congratulations to all of your co-authors as well on the book, some of whom are with us today. Thank you to everyone who attended. We love that you came in from everywhere. We love Bob Manukin was here, a great audience. Yeah, I know. It's so wonderful to have so many great people in attendance. And if you want to engage with the program on negotiation, we are offering a series of trainings, including a class taught by Alain in July. We would love to have you for his PON Global or another one of our trainings. And of course, we hope to see you here for many more events. Please come back to the recording, which will be up on our website in about a week. Thanks, Alain, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And I see so many of my friends in the chat, and I feel so bad I couldn't call you by your name, but you are in my heart. So good to have you with us today. And thanks, Nicole, and the wonderful team, Anna, Diane, and James, for all their support for this event.
What a pleasure. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.